Usually when we talk about like a math equation, there's this expectation of absolute immutable precision.
Right. Yeah, of
It's like
course.
balancing a checkbook at the end of the month. You put in the hours at work, you add up your hourly rate or, your salary, and the total just sits there neatly at the bottom line.
Exactly.
You work harder, you acquire a new skill, the number gets correspondingly bigger, it's clean, it's cause and effect.
It's comforting, honestly. I mean, we have this deep-seated psychological need for our effort to be visible,
Yeah.
to be, perfectly categorized and predictably rewarded by the market. We operate on this fundamental assumption that labor produces value, and that value is then returned to the laborer in a relatively fair, proportionate exchange.
Right. But then you step out of economic theory and into the actual modern economy, and suddenly it feels like that calculator is completely broken.
Oh, completely.
You hit the equals button, and it just gives you a syntax error.
Mhm.
Like, we're looking at a financial and professional landscape right now that is incredibly murky.
It really is the absolute definition of economic muddy waters. I mean, I've actually changed my backdrop today to a sprawling, illuminated cityscape.
Oh, yeah, I see that. It looks cool.
Thanks. Yeah, think endless skyscrapers, data centers, networks of light, because
Yeah.
it reflects the sheer macroeconomic scale of what we are dealing with. We are looking at a tectonic shift in how value is captured in our society.
And that brings us to exactly what we're unpacking today. We have a fascinating, deeply intertwined mission for this deep dive.
We really do.
We are pulling from two distinct but incredibly connected analytical texts that map out the future of work, wealth, and basically your daily life.
Yeah.
The first source outlines a meticulously detailed pathway explaining what the authors call the AI productivity paradox and wage stagnation.
Right.
And the second source explores a massive cultural and economic shift labeled the subscription economy and the erosion of ownership.
Which is honestly, when you lay these two sources side by side, they don't just complement each other, they interlock perfectly.
Yeah, they really do.
One explains what is happening to your ability to generate wealth, and the other explains what is happening to your ability to, well, consume and live within that new reality.
Right.
It is a map of exactly where we are, and more importantly, where the underlying math says we are going.
And for you listening right now, this deep dive is going to unravel exactly why you might be feeling a very strange, very specific economic disconnect in your own life.
Yeah, that feeling.
Right? It's that pervasive feeling where technology makes everything around you feel incredibly advanced, incredibly abundant, and yet personal wealth, stability, and actual physical ownership feel increasingly out of reach.
It's wild, right?
It is. If you've been wondering why you have a supercomputer in your pocket that can access the entirety of human knowledge, but you somehow can't seem to save for a down payment on just a standard starter home, you are in exactly the right place.
Because the core theme we are teasing apart today is staggering in its implications. We are actively moving into an era where economic productivity, like the actual measurable output of our society, might detach entirely from human wages.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand a macroeconomic shift of this magnitude, we have to start at the absolute micro level.
We have to.
We can't just talk about GDP and global markets, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to start right at the desk of the everyday office worker. We need to look at how the initial introduction of AI begins to quietly shift power away from the worker and directly to the employer.
Exactly.
Our first source maps this out as a cascading series of events, starting with what I'd call the efficiency squeeze.
The efficiency squeeze, yeah, the catalyst is exactly what you see making headlines every day, which is the rapidly falling cost of intelligence.
Right.
Artificial intelligence systems become cheaper to run and substantially more capable. Once that happens, businesses adopt them to reduce costs. That isn't a malicious conspiracy.
No, of course not.
It's just business 101. If a software tool can parse 1,000 invoices in, 3 seconds for fractions of a penny, and a human takes 3 hours and costs $100, the business has a fiduciary duty to use the tool.
But the human impact begins immediately. And it starts at the bottom of the corporate ladder, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, we aren't talking about AI building physical terminators or taking over the C-suite. We are talking about the automation of routine, repetitive office tasks. Data entry, basic scheduling, generating weekly analytics reports, level 1 customer service triage.
And the immediate consequence of that automation is the hollowing out of entry-level positions.
Right.
This is a critical structural change. Historically, those routine tasks were the training ground for new professionals. You came out of college or you transitioned from another field, and you spent your first 2 years doing the grunt work.
You paid your dues formatting Excel sheets.
Exactly. That was how you learned the business, understood the company's internal language, and proved your reliability.
But if AI excels at formatting those Excel sheets, the company simply needs fewer entry-level workers. Hiring slows down dramatically in administrative and support roles. We see this with customer service, too. We used to see massive, sprawling call centers with hundreds of representatives. Now, a highly sophisticated AI chatbot can resolve 60, maybe 70% of routine queries before a human ever even sees the ticket.
What's fascinating here is how quietly this hollowing out actually happens.
Yeah, you don't always hear about it.
Right, it isn't always the massive dramatic layoff announcements that make the front page of the financial papers. Often, it's just attrition. It's a hiring freeze.
Oh, sure.
Someone retires or moves to another company, and the human resources department simply doesn't replace them. The new software update can absorb their workload, so the headcount shrinks silently over a period of 2 or 3 years.
But the source material is very clear about this. This dynamic does not stop at the entry level or the administrative tier. It climbs up the cognitive ladder.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
This is where AI begins assisting programmers, financial analysts, and project managers. We're moving from routine admin work to complex cognitive labor.
And this is where the dynamic becomes deeply paradoxical. Because the selling point of AI, the way it's marketed to these professionals, is as a co-pilot.
Like it's there to help you.
Exactly. It makes you a superhuman worker. You can write code faster, you can analyze massive data sets in a fraction of the time, you can draft complex legal briefs before your lunch break. Your individual productivity spikes dramatically.
But here is the trap, and I think it's one of the most vital insights in the source material. Let's say you have a team of 10 software developers, and you give them all an enterprise AI coding assistant.
Okay.
Suddenly, everyone is 30% more efficient. The worker thinks, great, I'm producing 30% more value. I should see a massive bump in my compensation, or at least my workload will get way easier.
That's the logical assumption.
Right. But from the employer's perspective, a team of 10 that is 30% more efficient means they only actually need 7 people to maintain their current output.
Precisely. This is a crucial pivot point in the sources analysis. The very tool designed to help workers, the tool that genuinely makes a programmer more productive, actually weaponizes their own efficiency against their team size.
Wow.
If a company doesn't have an immediate need to scale its operations by 30%, it won't just keep paying 10 people to do the work of 13. It will cut the bottom 3 performers to save money and let the remaining 7 handle the baseline workload.
It's like upgrading a construction crew from hand saws to high-end pneumatic power tools.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, suddenly a crew doesn't need 5 carpenters to frame a house in a week, right? They just need one highly skilled person who knows exactly how to operate the power tools.
Right.
But instead of that remaining carpenter getting paid 5 times as much because they are now doing the work of 5 people,
Yeah,
the boss just keeps the savings.
exactly.
And I want to pause here and ask you,
Yeah.
why? Why doesn't the worker get to capture the surplus value they are now creating? Why doesn't the carpenter get the 5x raise?
Because of the leverage created by the 4 carpenters who just lost their jobs.
Oh, wow.
The moment the employer reduces the team from 10 to 7, those 3 displaced workers enter the labor market. Furthermore, you have new university graduates who are facing a market with fewer entry-level openings because, as we discussed, the bottom rung has been hollowed out.
Right, they can't get in either.
So you now have a swelling pool of highly qualified displaced labor desperately looking for work.
So the competition for the remaining jobs spikes, which fundamentally alters the power dynamic at the negotiating table.
It absolutely does.
The employer suddenly gains an immense amount of bargaining power.
It's the law of supply and demand applied to human labor. When 10 jobs become 7, the employer holds all the cards.
Yeah.
If that remaining carpenter, or in our modern case, the highly efficient AI-assisted developer, walks into the manager's office and asks for a 50% raise to match their new productivity, the manager can simply pull out a stack of resumes. They can say, I have 3 of your former colleagues plus 50 recent computer science grads who are willing to do this job for your current salary or even less. No, we aren't giving raises. You're lucky to be one of the 7 we kept.
This is the exact mechanism of wage stagnation.
It is.
It's not that workers are lazy or that they aren't producing value. They're producing more value than ever in human history.
Literally ever.
But their bargaining power has been structurally kneecapped by the efficiency of the tools they are using. The companies can become incredibly selective about who they hire, and they can dictate the terms of compensation because there is always a surplus of available talent.
And I think it's important to ground this in reality for the listener. Think about your own workplace over the last couple of years.
Yeah, think about it.
Have you noticed strategic realignments? Have you seen open positions quietly closed without being filled?
Oh, all the time.
Have you noticed the workload subtly increasing for the remaining staff, perfectly coinciding with the rollout of new automated enterprise tools? The sources suggest this is absolutely not a coincidence.
Oh.
It is a direct, observable chain of macroeconomic causality. You are experiencing the efficiency squeeze firsthand.
Now, if you're a smart, proactive worker experiencing this local squeeze, your immediate instinct is probably going to be, fine. If my local market is oversaturated and my company's being stingy, I'll just change the game. I will utilize remote work.
Right. That's the pivot.
I'll find a company in another state or even another country that values my skills and pays better. It seems like the logical escape hatch.
It does, and the sources anticipate this exact reaction. But rather than being an escape hatch, this pivot leads directly into the next major phase of our structural map, which we can categorize as the spillover effect.
The spillover effect, okay.
Remote work combined with AI-driven displacement creates a profoundly volatile cocktail for wages.
Let's explore that, because during the pandemic, remote work was heralded as the ultimate worker victory. It was the great equalizer. No more 2-hour commutes, more flexibility, the death of the cubicle.
Yeah, that was the narrative.
How does this source argue that remote work actually becomes a trap?
Because remote work simultaneously creates massive, borderless, global labor pools. It is the ultimate double-edged sword of the digital age.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to realize that labor markets used to be naturally walled gardens. If a company was headquartered in San Francisco or New York and they needed an analyst or a marketing director, they generally had to hire someone who lived within a 50-mile radius.
I guess they had to commute.
Exactly. That meant the company had to pay a wage commensurate with the incredibly high cost of living in those specific cities. The geography protected the workers' wage floor.
Right. There was a physical tether between the company's location and the local economic reality. But remote work completely severs that tether.
Exactly. Once a company realizes that a job can be done entirely via Slack, Zoom, and cloud-based software, they also realize that they don't need to pay San Francisco wages.
Right.
They can hire someone in the American Midwest. Or, more impactfully, they can hire someone in Eastern Europe, Latin America, or Southeast Asia. Global competition dramatically increases.
Wow.
Firms can hire brilliant, highly educated workers from lower-cost regions who are thrilled to work for a fraction of the Silicon Valley salary, because that fraction still represents a massive premium in their local economy.
So if you're the worker who thought remote work was your liberation, you suddenly wake up and realize you aren't just competing with the person across town for that senior project manager role.
No, not at all.
You are competing with thousands of equally qualified people across the globe. You've entered a global arena where the geographic wage floor has completely vanished. The pressure on your local wages intensifies immensely.
And this global labor arbitrage happens at the exact same time that AI is already displacing workers locally, which forces a massive behavioral shift in the workforce. Displaced workers, or workers fleeing heavily automated fields, have to seek alternative careers. They have to pivot.
But the source outlines a fatal flaw in this pivot strategy. When a massive demographic of workers realizes their specific niche is shrinking, they don't all magically disperse into entirely unrelated, uncrowded fields.
No, they don't.
They usually move into adjacent occupations. If you're a displaced administrative coordinator, you aren't likely to suddenly become a biochemist.
Right, the barrier to entry is too high.
Exactly. You're going to pivot to human resources or project management or marketing coordination, roles that utilize your existing organizational skills.
Which means the labor supply suddenly skyrockets in those adjacent fields. This is the core engine of the spillover effect. The competition doesn't stay neatly contained in the sector that was directly automated by AI.
Spreads.
Yes. The displaced workers flood into neighboring professions, bringing intense competition with them.
I want to make sure I really understand the mechanics of this, because it challenges the standard narrative of just learn a new skill.
Yeah, it really does.
You're saying that even if my specific job, let's say I'm an HR director, is completely immune to AI automation because it requires deep human empathy and complex negotiation, my wages could still be suppressed.
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, because while AI might not be able to do your job as an HR director, AI might have automated thousands of data analysts and administrative staff at your company. Those intelligent, capable people need to pay their mortgages.
Right.
So they take a crash course in HR management, they leverage their institutional knowledge, and they apply for HR roles. Suddenly, when you go to negotiate your salary as the HR director, the company has a massive stack of applicants willing to take your job for 20% less.
Unbelievable.
Your wages are suppressed not by the algorithm directly, but by the flood of human refugees fleeing the algorithm.
The AI and the remote work infrastructure are acting as a twin engine of wage suppression. It is a cascading phenomenon. A localized shock, say, a breakthrough in AI customer support routing sends a tidal wave of applicants into every adjacent white-collar profession, suppressing wage growth across the entire corporate spectrum. It artificially inflates the labor supply everywhere all at once.
And this brings us to a very dark, very practical question.
Yeah.
If the corporate office is hollowing out its entry level, reducing its cognitive mid-level teams, and globalizing its remote workforce, and if all the adjacent white-collar sectors are completely flooded with displaced applicants, where do the workers actually go to survive?
They enter what I look at as the desperation pivot.
The desperation pivot, yes.
When the corporate ladder loses its bottom rungs and pulls the top rungs out of reach, workers fall into the safety nets. And according to the source material, those safety nets are the gig economy and the physical trades.
It is a completely rational, survival-based migration. We see workers flooding into gig work, driving for ride shares, delivering groceries, doing freelance digital tasks on platforms like Upwork or Fiverr. Initially, this looks like a relief valve. The gig economy expands to absorb the excess labor.
But the source maps out how this relief valve quickly clogs, because the exact same laws of supply and demand apply here, but they are hyper-accelerated by platform algorithms.
Oh, absolutely.
As more displaced white-collar workers enter the gig economy to supplement their stagnant primary incomes, the platforms become fiercely crowded.
And we have to look at the underlying architecture of these gig platforms to understand why this is so devastating. The algorithms governing ride shares or freelance marketplaces use dynamic pricing.
Right.
They're designed to find the absolute lowest price a worker is willing to accept for a task at any given millisecond. When supply the number of drivers or freelancers vastly outstrips demand, the algorithm relentlessly pushes the payouts down.
Which means earnings per worker rapidly decline, and income becomes terrifyingly unpredictable. A gig that used to reliably pay your rent when you worked 30 hours a week suddenly requires 50 hours a week just to break even, simply because there are thousands of new, desperate people logging onto the app willing to take the lower fare.
It's brutal.
It's like everyone rushing onto a life raft after the ship hits an iceberg. At first, the raft keeps you afloat, but as more and more people climb aboard, the raft starts to sink under the sheer weight of the crowd.
That is a visceral way to put it, but economically accurate. The surplus of labor completely erodes the value of the gig. So seeing this instability in the digital gig economy, another massive cohort of displaced white-collar workers decides to pivot back to the physical world.
Yeah.
They look at the landscape and say, you know what? AI cannot unclog a toilet. AI cannot run a new electrical wire through a residential wall. I am going to abandon the knowledge economy and go into the physical trades.
Which, on its face, sounds like incredibly solid advice. We've all heard the narrative. Learn to weld, become a plumber, the trades are desperate for people.
Sure.
But the source pathway is absolutely ruthless here. It points out that even this seemingly safe harbor has systemic bottlenecks.
The first bottleneck is credentialing and training. You can't just declare yourself a master electrician on a Tuesday.
Right, you'd electrocute yourself.
Exactly. You need years of apprenticeship. But as the flood of white-collar refugees hits the trades, the training pipelines become intensely crowded. More workers are competing for a finite number of apprenticeships. Employers in the physical trades suddenly face massive applicant pools that they haven't seen in decades.
And what happens when a plumbing company has 200 applicants for 2 apprentice spots? The exact same thing that happened in the corporate office.
Yep.
Wage bargaining weakens. The employer regains total leverage. Even in the physical world, insulated from direct automation, the oversupply of labor changes the fundamental power dynamic.
And this leads to what I consider the most poignant, psychologically revealing step in the entire pathway.
Okay, what is it?
The source notes that in this environment, benefits become more important to the worker than raises.
I want to spend some time on this because this isn't just an economic data point, right? This is a profound shift in human ambition.
Profound.
When workers realize they have zero leverage, when they are competing with a massive pool of equally desperate applicants in both the knowledge sector and the physical trades, their mindset completely fractures. They stop negotiating for growth, they stop asking for the ladder to go higher, and they start begging for the floor not to fall out from under them.
It is a defensive crouch. You aren't playing to win the game of capitalism anymore. You are playing not to lose your shelter.
Exactly.
You walk into a performance review, and instead of demanding a 10% raise to match inflation, you find yourself saying, please, just don't cut my health care. Please just guarantee me enough hours next month so I don't get evicted. The entire psychological posture of the labor force shifts from aspiration to sheer preservation.
And while the workforce is stuck in this defensive crouch, paralyzed by the fear of replacement, the companies are aggressively pressing their advantage.
Naturally.
They ruthlessly focus on efficiency gains, knowing full well that the workforce is too fractured, too dispersed, and too desperate to unionize or push back in any meaningful way.
Which brings us to the grand finale of this pathway. We have traced the displacement from the micro level, the single automated spreadsheet, through the globalized spillover, and into the desperation of the gig economy. Now, the source pulls the camera all the way back to reveal the ultimate macroeconomic decoupling, the grand shift between capital and labor.
As all of this human scrambling is happening, the AI itself doesn't stop. It continues improving. It doesn't sleep, doesn't unionize, doesn't ask for health care. It just gets exponentially better at processing information.
And faster.
Right, which leads to a phenomenon where overall economic productivity rises significantly faster than employment.
We need to define exactly why this is so historically anomalous. This is the essence of the productivity paradox.
Let's get into it.
For the entire 20th century, classical economic theory held that productivity and employment were inextricably linked. If a car manufacturer wanted to produce twice as many cars, they had to build a second factory and hire a second workforce.
Right, the inputs and outputs matched.
Exactly. The two lines on the graph, economic output and human employment, moved in tandem.
But the sources are showing us a world where those lines violently diverge. The line representing economic output, driven by zero marginal cost software and AI, shoots straight up into the stratosphere.
Like a rocket.
But the line representing human employment stays entirely flat, or even dips. We are generating unprecedented wealth, but we are doing it without proportional hiring.
This raises the most important question of our entire deep dive. If we as a society are producing more economic value, more goods, and more services than at any prior point in human history, but the workers aren't seeing that value reflected in their paychecks, where exactly is all that money going? Who is capturing the value of this new output?
The source gives us the unvarnished mathematical answer. Capital income grows much, much faster than labor income. The people capturing the value are the asset holders.
It always is.
It's the people who own the server farms, the people who own the proprietary AI models, the shareholders of the mega-cap tech companies. In this economy, ownership becomes exponentially more valuable than wages.
Let's break down the structural difference between capital income and labor income in an AI-driven firm, because this explains the entire paradox.
Okay.
If you are a worker relying on labor income, you have a hard physical limit. You can only work perhaps 12 or 14 hours a day before you collapse. Your output is finite.
All right.
But if you are a capital owner, say, you own the equity in an AI company whose software writes software, your marginal cost of production approaches zero. You can sell 1 million copies of an algorithm or 1 million API calls for almost the exact same cost as selling one.
That's insane.
It is. The profit margins are near infinite, and all of that surplus goes directly back to the capital owners in the form of stock buybacks, massive dividends, and appreciating asset valuations.
Meanwhile, the workers are structurally trapped on the other side of the equation. The vast majority of the population relies almost entirely on earned labor income. And as we've established, because of the efficiency squeeze and the spillover effect, wage growth trails far behind this exploding productivity growth.
And because wages are stagnating while the asset class gets richer, household purchasing power for the average worker grows agonizingly slowly, or even goes backward when adjusted for real-world inflation in things like housing and healthcare,
Yeah, everything just costs more.
which forces the worker to seek multiple income sources just to maintain their standard of living. The side hustle stops being a fun way to save for a vacation and becomes a structural mandate for basic survival. We see part-time and contract work becoming the norm rather than the exception.
Culminating in the final, inescapable mathematical reality. Labor's overall share of the national income declines. The percentage of the GDP that goes to the people actually doing the work shrinks, while the percentage going to the people who own the algorithms expands. Wages stagnate completely, despite society possessing the most advanced technological capabilities imaginable.
It is a profoundly sobering, incredibly meticulous deconstruction of exactly how an economic miracle, artificial intelligence, can result in financial stagnation for the average person.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Yeah, let's bring it back to them.
If you have been sitting at your kitchen table, looking at your budget, feeling like you are working harder than ever, producing more at your job than ever, and somehow you're able to buy less and less with your paycheck, you need to know this isn't a personal failure.
It really isn't.
This isn't just in your head. This is the exact mathematical mechanism the macroeconomic sources are describing. You are living through the decoupling of labor and capital.
But, and this is where we need to aggressively hit the brakes and inject some vital perspective into this deep dive, the sources explicitly state that we need a reality check.
Thank goodness.
After walking through this incredibly dense, somewhat terrifying 50-step pathway of seemingly inevitable decline, we have to ask a critical question. Is this actually destiny? Are we locked into this dystopian trajectory?
Right. We cannot treat this model as gospel. The source material itself provides a massive flashing caveat. The text explicitly states this is only one possible scenario, not a certainty.
Not a certainty.
And to understand why it's not a certainty, we have to look backward. We have to look at historical context.
History is absolutely littered with technological disruptions that initially looked like the end of human labor. Mechanization and the looms during the Industrial Revolution spawned the Luddite movement, where workers literally smashed the machines because they feared permanent destitution.
Right.
The electrification of factories displaced millions. The advent of the personal computer and the internet completely eradicated entire categories of clerical work.
Every single time, the technology caused massive, painful short-term disruption.
Always.
But every single time, it also created entirely new industries, new occupations, and new forms of wealth that the displaced workers eventually transitioned into. Think about the spreadsheet.
Oh, that's a great example.
Right. In the early 1980s, when VisiCalc and Excel hit the market, bookkeepers and lower-level accountants absolutely panicked. They thought a piece of software that could recalculate a ledger in seconds would destroy their entire profession.
But it didn't destroy accounting. It elevated it. Because the software handled the tedious arithmetic, accountants could focus on complex financial modeling, strategic tax planning, and forecasting. Entirely new, highly paid fields of financial analysis were born directly out of the spreadsheet's existence.
So I have to push back on the doom and gloom here. We survived the tractor, the steam engine, and the spreadsheet. Why wouldn't AI just follow the exact same historical pattern? Why wouldn't just invent the 21st century equivalent of the web designer or the SEO specialist or the social media manager, jobs we couldn't have even conceived of 30 years ago?
Your historical optimism is completely valid, and I want to assure you this is the exact debate tearing the field of economics apart right now.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The central burning question the source poses is a matter of timing. Will AI create new, well-paying human jobs as quickly as it automates existing ones? It's a race between the speed of displacement and the speed of creation.
To break that down, the source outlines three broad possibilities that economists are currently debating. Let's walk through them, starting with the optimistic scenario.
In the pure optimistic scenario, AI acts like a massive tide that lifts all boats. Yes, old, tedious jobs disappear. But AI dramatically boosts productivity across every sector, lowering the cost of goods so significantly that consumer demand explodes.
Okay, that sounds pretty good.
It gets better. This explosion in demand creates countless new industries, perhaps personalized education, advanced healthcare coordination, massive clean energy infrastructure projects, which creates a severe labor shortage. Companies have to compete fiercely for human talent to manage these new AI systems, driving wages up significantly. In this scenario, everyone genuinely gets richer.
But then there is the middle ground scenario.
Right. The middle ground is a story of intense friction. Here, AI absolutely raises overall economic productivity, but the wage growth is incredibly fractured and uneven.
Meaning not everyone gets it.
Exactly. Some workers, perhaps the highly specialized engineers building the models or executives leveraging them, see massive, unprecedented wealth gains. But for the vast majority of workers, the speed of job displacement outpaces their ability to retrain.
Because they can't learn the new skills fast enough.
Right. The new jobs being created require skills that the displaced workers simply don't have and can't acquire quickly. This leads to a prolonged, agonizing period of stagnation and underemployment for the middle class. It's a two-tiered economy.
And finally, the third possibility. The pure pessimistic scenario.
The pessimistic scenario assumes that AI is a fundamentally different type of technology than the tractor or the spreadsheet. The tractor replaced human muscle. The spreadsheet replaced human arithmetic. AI is attempting to replace human cognition.
Right.
If AI can eventually learn any new cognitive task as well as a human, then any new industry created by AI can just be run by AI.
Oof.
In this scenario, the speed of displacement permanently outpaces the speed of creation, leading to systemic, inescapable wage pressure and structural obsolescence for a massive percentage of the human workforce.
So looking back at the incredibly detailed pathway we just analyzed, the efficiency squeeze, the global spillover, the desperation pivot, where does that fit into these three possibilities?
The source authors note that the specific pathway we just discussed aligns closest with the middle to pessimistic trajectory.
Got it.
It describes a world where the economic pie absolutely gets bigger, but the mechanisms of capital extraction ensure that almost all of the new pie goes to the owners of the technology, leaving the workers fighting over an ever-shrinking slice of wage growth.
Which forces us to ask a profoundly practical question. If this middle to pessimistic path does become our reality, how does the average person actually live?
That's the real question.
If your wages are structurally stagnant for a decade, but the world keeps turning, how do you consume? How do you shelter yourself? How do you survive in a highly advanced capitalist society without capital?
And this is where the genius of pairing our two sources today becomes apparent, because the second source, the subscription economy and the erosion of ownership, answers exactly how a society of stagnant wages continues to function.
Because you have to live somehow.
Right. If you do not have wage growth, you cannot accumulate the capital necessary to buy things outright. You are structurally locked out of ownership. Therefore, you must find an alternative mechanism to access the things you need to live.
You can't buy, therefore you must rent. This bridges us perfectly into the theory of the erosion of ownership. The theory here is stark, but incredibly observable. It suggests that working class and middle class households are going to own fewer and fewer physical assets.
Much fewer.
Instead, they will subscribe to a massive web of services. They will experience a bizarre phenomenon called digital abundance, while relying entirely on access rather than ownership for their material survival.
To simplify it, it is the shift from owning a DVD to subscribing to Netflix, but that exact same economic model applied to the entire macroeconomic structure of a human life.
Let's look at the overwhelming trends the source provides that support this theory. The first is the most obvious, and we're all living it right now. The massive growth of the subscription model across nearly every industry.
We mention entertainment media, but the transition goes so much deeper than movies and music. Look at software.
Oh, software is a huge one.
10 or 15 years ago, you bought a physical CD-ROM of Microsoft Office or Adobe Creative Suite. You paid a couple of $100, you installed it, and you owned that version forever. Today, that concept is practically extinct.
Totally gone.
You pay a recurring monthly fee for the rest of your life to access cloud-based software.
As well. Cloud gaming means you don't need to buy a powerful console, you just rent server time. The rise of ride-hailing and fractional car leasing means fewer young people are purchasing vehicles outright. Even the AI tools we talked about earlier, the ones displacing workers, are sold as monthly subscriptions.
Right.
The source makes it clear. The corporate shift from selling a product once to extracting a perpetual recurring rent from the consumer is a massive, accelerating reality.
But the erosion of ownership isn't just about Netflix accounts and software licenses. It hits the most critical, foundational physical asset a human being can own, the primary vehicle for generational wealth.
Housing. The source highlights the catastrophic housing affordability challenges across the developed world. In almost every major metropolitan area, the cost of purchasing a home has completely and utterly decoupled from local median incomes. Housing prices have skyrocketed at a pace that makes stagnant wage growth look like a flat line.
Which means the basic math of a 20% down payment has become an impossible hurdle for millions of people. You simply cannot save enough money on a stagnant wage to outpace the inflation of the asset. The goalposts are moving faster than you can run.
Wow.
As a result, younger generations are buying homes significantly later in life than their parents or grandparents did, and a massive percentage are resigning themselves to the reality that they may never own property at all. They will be lifelong renters.
This directly supports the core thesis. Ownership is becoming structurally cordoned off for the working class. But we have to ask why. Why is ownership slipping away so rapidly in an era of such profound technological wealth?
The source points to a fundamental shift in the nature of what constitutes wealth in the 21st century. It's the growing dominance of intangible assets. Think back 100 years to the industrial titans. Wealth was physical. It was heavy. It was steel mills, automobile factories, railroads, physical land, and oil derricks.
But today, the most valuable companies on Earth don't produce massive amounts of physical things. Much of modern wealth is entirely intangible. It's software code, it's user data, it's network effects, it's patents and intellectual property. It's the platform itself.
And this distinction is critical for understanding the erosion of ownership. Intangible assets have a unique property. They scale infinitely and cost almost nothing to replicate. You don't need a massive unionized labor force of 50,000 people to maintain a software platform, the way you need a massive labor force to run a steel mill. Therefore, the wealth generated by these intangible assets heavily, overwhelmingly favors the owners of the capital over the workers.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like we have fundamentally traded castles for clouds.
Castles for clouds, I like that.
Yeah, we used to own physical things, tangible markers of wealth that you could hold, defend, and pass down. Now, wealth is a proprietary algorithm. It's a server network housed in a nondescript warehouse. It's the intellectual property behind a streaming platform. You cannot physically touch modern wealth. And because you can't touch it, because it exists entirely in the ether of corporate servers and legal frameworks, it makes it incredibly frictionless for the average worker to be completely locked out of owning any piece of it.
But the source notes a truly fascinating, somewhat insidious paradox to this lack of physical ownership. While you may not own a home, while you may not own the software you use to do your job, the system compensates you with something else to keep you compliant. Digital abundance.
Right. If you look at the average person today, they have access to things that would have seemed like pure magic or the absolute height of unimaginable luxury just a few decades ago.
You have instantaneous, high-definition video communication with anyone on the face of the earth. You carry vast, comprehensive libraries of human history, science, and literature in your pocket. You have endless streams of high-definition entertainment tailored exactly to your psychological preferences. You can access AI assistants that can write poetry, compose music, or code software for you in seconds.
And all of this absolute cornucopia of digital wealth is available at a staggeringly low cost relative to historical equivalents. You might be paying $15 or $20 a month for a subscription that grants you access to more movies and music than an emperor could have consumed in a lifetime a century ago.
We are looking at a stark juxtaposition. Digital abundance masked over physical scarcity. You have the entirety of the world's knowledge, entertainment, and communication infrastructure in your pocket for a trivial monthly fee. But you cannot afford the down payment on a 400-square-foot apartment in the city where you are forced to work.
It is a bizarre, deeply unsettling trade-off. We are rich in pixels and destitute in property.
Exactly.
But just as we did with the 50-step wage stagnation pathway, we have to look at the counterarguments. The second source doesn't just present this "you will own nothing and be happy" concept as an unavoidable doom loop. There is substantial pushback within the text. I want to play devil's advocate here because humans have a deeply ingrained primal urge to own their domain. Renting movies is fine, but I want to own the roof over my head. This theory has some massive logical holes in it.
And the source material readily acknowledges those holes. It outlines several major trends that push back violently against the inevitability of the erosion of ownership. The first and most fundamental is exactly what you just mentioned: immutable human desire.
People still highly value ownership. The desire hasn't evaporated just because the prices went up. People want homes. They want to own their cars. They want to start and own physical businesses.
Right.
They want investments that they actually control.
Right.
The desire for security, for autonomy, for the ability to accumulate wealth and pass it to their children, that is hardwired into the human psyche. People aren't choosing to rent forever because they suddenly prefer the flexibility. They are doing it because they are financially cornered. The demand hasn't disappeared. It is just being temporarily suppressed by price.
And this brings us to what I consider the most compelling, optimistic counterargument in the entire source text. We have spent an hour talking about how AI suppresses wages by making labor hyper-efficient. But we have to look at the other side of the ledger.
The other side.
What if AI also suppresses prices? Technology doesn't just lower the cost of cognitive labor, it can drastically lower physical costs as well.
This is a huge point. The source notes that AI, combined with advanced robotics, may drastically reduce the costs associated with manufacturing, global logistics, construction, and energy production.
Think about the macro implications of that. If an AI system can optimize a global supply chain down to the exact penny, eliminating all waste. If 3D printing and automated robotic construction can frame and build a physical house in a fraction of the time, using a fraction of materials, with zero human error, the baseline cost of physical goods could absolutely plummet.
Let me push you on this, because classical economics dictates that if you reduce the cost of production, the price of the good falls, which theoretically increases consumer purchasing power. So if AI makes designing, permitting, and building a house 50% cheaper through robotics and logistics, couldn't that actually solve the housing crisis? If an AI-managed smart grid makes electricity virtually free, doesn't that immediately put massive amounts of capital back into the pocket of the stagnant wage worker?
In a pure vacuum of economic theory, yes, absolutely. If those AI-driven efficiency gains are large enough, and if they are allowed to flow through to the consumer, the cost of living could drop so precipitously that it meets the stagnant wage.
Wow.
In that scenario, physical ownership suddenly becomes attainable again for the middle class, not because they are making more money, but because the physical world has become radically cheaper to build.
And there is always a massive structural but. When we deal with economics, technology does not exist in a vacuum. The source makes a very firm, undeniable point here. The future of ownership is not determined by technology alone.
This cannot be overstated. Technology is merely a lever. It is a tool that creates surplus value. How the benefits of that surplus value are distributed is dictated entirely by human institutions and policy. The source lists several key areas that will serve as the actual battlegrounds: housing supply regulations, tax policy, financial market structures, labor institutions, and corporate monopolies.
Let's apply that to the cheat AI house example. If robotics can build a house for $50,000, but local zoning laws, artificial scarcity, and NIMBY policies prevent that house from ever getting a permit to be built on a plot of land, the technology is completely useless to the worker.
Completely useless.
The housing crisis remains, and the artificial value of existing real estate is protected.
Exactly. The cost of the structure might go down, but the cost of the land and the permission to build skyrockets. Or look at tax policy. If the tax code allows all the unprecedented surplus value generated by AI to be hoarded by the asset class through stock buybacks, without any redistribution, taxation, or reinvestment into the public sphere, the worker remains structurally locked out.
Yeah.
The owners of the AI construction bots just capture higher margins. They don't lower the price of the house.
So whether ownership becomes broader, meaning more average people own their slice of the pie, or whether it becomes highly concentrated, meaning a tiny techno-feudal class owns everything and rents it to the rest of us, will be heavily influenced by these very unsexy policy decisions.
Policy is everything.
We are not helpless passengers on the AI train. Human institutions still have to lay the tracks.
So synthesizing everything we've unpacked today, we have two extremes. We have the pessimistic extreme, 50 steps to total wage stagnation, leading to a dystopian world where you own absolutely nothing, rent everything, and sedate yourself with digital abundance. And we have the optimistic extreme. AI solves the physical scarcity problem, drives down the cost of housing and energy to near zero, and unleashes a new era of broad democratic ownership. Where does the source actually land?
We must synthesize these two texts into a final assessment of our most probable reality. The author of the source material provides their own rigorous assessment based on current observable data trends.
The author states clearly, if I look at current trends alone, I would say the evidence supports the direction of the erosion of ownership theory far more than it did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
They acknowledge the stark reality. There is undeniably more subscription-based consumption. We are absolutely living in an era of digital abundance. Capital ownership and intangible assets are demonstrably more important for wealth creation than human labor. And it is mathematically more difficult for an average household to accumulate major physical assets today than it was in the 1980s.
However, the author pulls back from the cliff edge. They state that the evidence is currently weak for the extreme, absolute idea that most people will permanently lose the ability to accumulate physical assets. A total society-wide erosion of ownership is not supported by the data yet.
The author notes that such an extreme dystopian outcome is technically possible, but it is contingent on a worst-case scenario. A world where AI-driven wage pressure is devastatingly severe, and governments fail completely to pass policies that share the productivity gains.
So what is the actual synthesis? What is the most likely future you and I are walking into over the next 10 to 15 years?
The sources outline a very complex, precarious middle ground reality. It is a future where you, the listener, will likely have access to truly extraordinary, mind-bending digital services. AI tutors for your children, incredibly personalized preventative healthcare analytics, endless entertainment. You will subscribe to a vast network of conveniences, but simultaneously, you will likely own a significantly smaller share of productive, tangible assets than previous generations did.
And because you own a smaller share of assets, you will face massive systemic friction when it comes to building generational wealth through your wages alone.
It's neither the utopian vision of everyone getting rich by working a few hours a week alongside an AI, nor is it a dystopian cyberpunk collapse of civilization. It is a resilient but heavily strained middle ground.
It is a life rich in digital experiences, rich in temporary convenience, but deeply financially precarious when it comes to tangible, generation-building wealth. It's the paradox of modern life. You can stream any movie ever made in pristine 4K on your commute, but the commute is to a job whose wages haven't meaningfully increased in a decade, and you are driving a car you don't own back to an apartment you can never afford to buy.
That is the incredibly nuanced, occasionally frustrating paradox we're currently living inside.
This has been an incredibly deep, demanding journey today. We have taken you from the microscopic level of a single AI tool automating a basic data entry task. Watch that displacement spill over into globalized remote competition and gig economy crowding. We've traced exactly how that friction leads mathematically to systemic wage stagnation, decoupling human labor from economic output, and finally seen how that wage stagnation perfectly primes the population to accept a subscription-based life, a bizarre reality of immense digital abundance layered over profound physical lack.
It is a vast, complex, and frankly intimidating map. But understanding the mechanisms of the map, understanding the how and the why of the economy, is the very first step to successfully navigating it.
The political and economic debates of the next decade won't just be about whether AI is smart enough to do your job. Those arguments are already over. The real struggles will be about who owns the foundational systems that the AI runs on, how the massive, unprecedented wealth generated by those systems is taxed and distributed, and whether human policy will protect human dignity.
I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. If we are indeed moving into a world where your labor can no longer buy you physical assets, and you are increasingly forced to subscribe to your daily life if you are renting your software, your entertainment, your transportation, and your housing, what happens when the owners of those digital subscriptions decide to raise their prices all at once? If you do not own the tangible tools of your own life, who exactly is the architect of your freedom?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking closely at the systems around you. Keep questioning the math behind the headlines. And remember that when the economic calculator seems broken, it might just be calculating a completely different equation entirely. Stay curious.